CO2 debate, a distraction from weather manipulation by military. Day in, day out, the press, radio and television keep reporting on the fatal consequences of global climate change by CO2. A massive increase in taxes, the regulation of the economy, lucrative CO2 certificate trading, restrictions and requirements at the expense of the population are the answers to the scenarios. Critical voices are categorically and undifferentiatedly being penalized as climate deniers. But on closer inspection, the so-called climate deniers often only question the official declaration that CO2 is the cause for weather disasters such as droughts, floods, storms, etc. Cloud TV embarks on an interesting search for clues, perhaps leading to completely different causes for increasing weather chaos. There is a wealth of eyewitness reports on the internet about substances being sprayed into the atmosphere and about high-performance antenna systems used to manipulate the weather. These are officially being called conspiracy theories. However, since the abundance of information can no longer be suppressed, it is being increasingly conceded to in part or being presented as necessary for preventing climate change. In this broadcast, Cloud TV presents official voices from radio and television, some even from years ago. Let's start looking at these clues. First, on 14th March 2019, Swiss Environment Minister Simonetta Sommaruga said the following in an interview on the sidelines of the 4th United Nations Environment Assembly. Yes, Switzerland has tried to put the topic geoengineering, that is, the spraying of particles into the atmosphere, on the table. That information is collected, that opportunities and risks are looked at. These are experiments that are made without even knowing the consequences. We will fight for this. It'll certainly continue. The topic is too important and at best too problematic for us to simply look the other way. Ms. Sommaruga speaks here about experiments with spraying particles into the atmosphere. But are these experiments new and quasi just beginning, just occurring on a small scale? Second, already January 14, 2009, meteorologist Günther Tiersch made some irritating remarks during the weather report on the German TV channel ZDF. Günther Tiersch explains the weather on the weather chart, I quote, "And then we have something here that we cannot identify as snow or rain. Here in the west, these serpentine lines, probably some planes, military planes, have released it in the afternoon over the North Sea at an altitude of about 5 to 6 kilometers, has nothing to do with the weather." Shortly after this, due to numerous viewer questions about this weather report, ZDF interviews the Weather Service expert Carsten Brandt. Here are excerpts from the interview in the original wording. It's a phenomenon that Carsten Brandt from the Weather Service Donnerwetter knows well. Already back in 2005, meteorologists noticed such strange ghost clouds for the first time. Warships also camouflaged themselves with such artificial clouds. Chaff was already developed in the Second World War. At that time, they were made of staniol strips. Today, they are glass fibers vapor deposited with aluminium with a length of 15 to 25 millimeters and a diameter of approximately 100 micrometers. If the filaments are half the wavelength of the radar, false echoes occur. For the enormously large ghost clouds coming in from the Dutch coast, tons of the substance must fall down again and again over Germany. We're setting up environmental zones and the like, but apparently they do not apply at an altitude of 4 or 5 kilometers above the North Sea and above Germany. It doesn't matter what is being sprayed up there. Incredible. Even if these clouds do not come from the German armed forces, the fact that nobody feels responsible for substances which regularly descend over Germany and which are actually forbidden, meteorologists consider absolutely absurd. Absurd is kind of a nice way of saying the population is being fooled here. Third, The German physicist and television presenter Jochen Bublad made very detailed statements on the subject of weather manipulation by the military in a documentary for CDF TV. Bublad created the CDF science program Adventure Research until 2008. In one episode, he discusses weather manipulation by the military using huge antenna systems and the creation of artificial clouds. Here an excerpt, also in original wording. There is a suspicion that the powerful transmitters and the large antenna systems of HAARP are also used for these military experiments. Gakona, Alaska. Far away from any civilization, the American military operates a facility for manipulating the ionosphere. The name of the mysterious project is HAARP. A huge wall of antennas can emit radio waves into the ionosphere. With the radio waves, one tries to change the ionosphere. The radio waves are pumping energy into this layer of electrically charged particles. The ionosphere is getting charged, expands itself at these points, and shows disturbances. It's one way to cause trouble for the military adversary. Officially, however, HAARP is only meant to research the ionosphere. Here, near Tromsø, Norway, experiments with the ionosphere are also conducted by Europeans for research. With special planned constructions, radar impulses are sent into the ionosphere. A small part of these signals are sprinkled back through the streams of electrons in the ionosphere and received again by the antennas. Conclusions on the density, energy, and movement of the electrons can be drawn from that. Listen to another voice reporting in great detail on the nature and objectives of weather manipulation. Fourth, the Spanish television channel La Ocho Zamora TV interviewed Josefina Fraile of Asociación Tierra SOS Tenible on October 19, 2017, under the headline Geoengineering Pact of Silence. Listen to some extracts of the original. At the beginning, it is about a ban on so-called climate weapons. Josefina Fraile refers to the Environmental Modification Convention, ENMOD, that is the Convention on the Prohibition of Military or any other hostile use of environmental modification techniques. This is a treaty under international law that was adopted by the United Nations, the UN, as Resolution 3172 as early as 1976. Explicit mention is made of interventions which have the following effects: earthquakes or alterations of the Earth's crust, tsunamis, weather phenomena such as cyclones, tornadoes, cloud formation, precipitation, rain, disturbance of the ecological balance of a region, influence on ocean currents, etc. An agreement has been made that the climate weapon may not be used in wars, but in fact it is still being used. What can be done with this weapon and what is it used for? With this weapon you can create rain, storms, clouds, lightning, thunderstorms anywhere in the world. Or the opposite, you can dissolve rain fronts, stop hail and snowfall, and even create drought. What happens? This weapon of climate control, whoever possesses it, has absolute control over the precious resources of this world, especially over food. In plain language, if a country has this technology, it controls the water tap of the whole world. Do what you're told, and you get water. Or, if you're against it, your country gets undersupplied with water. Breaking up, destroying of water resources, Prolonged droughts are the result, which then leads to the country being unable of providing food for its population. The consequence is a famine. This is real. There are countries that have this technology, and in the USA, this technology has already become part of their foreign policy. A report by the North American Air Force is called, mind the title, Owning the Weather Till 2025. This title, which is self-explanatory, leaves us without words or breath. That one can be so presumptuous as to want to control the world's water tap, this does not go into most people's heads. This report also says that a modification of the climate is part of the American foreign policy, whether the world wants this or not. And this policy is enforced through bilateral agreements, through organizations like NATO, which are responsible for us, or through the United Nations. In fact, in the last General Assembly of the United Nations in Section D of the 5th Report on Climate Change, the IPCC was more or less legitimizing what is called geoengineering. Well, it is clear who has this technique can blackmail whoever he wants. The moment this method of warfare was banned by the United Nations, of course we asked ourselves, a country that can control the climate and thus has power over the resources all over the world, will this country give up this dominion just because it has, with great delay, signed a United Nations agreement? Very unlikely. The only thing left for this country is to give the dog a new collar. In other words, create a global problem and then offer the global solution. The global problem consisted in the creation of a new religion, climate change and global warming. Now, are there such attempts by the mainstream media to make interventions in natural weather events acceptable as measures for climate protection? Yes, definitely. Swiss radio SRF4, for example, in 2015 presented a kind of sun protection for the Earth, high up in the atmosphere. According to Thomas Peter, an atmospheric chemist at ETH Zurich, this could, for example, be achieved by countless tiny particles flying around like tiny mirrors high up in the atmosphere. They would reflect the sunlight right back into space. Many experts and environmental organizations are apparently very skeptical about geoengineering. But global warming is supposedly becoming increasingly dramatic. As a result, more and more researchers are said to have recently spoken out in favor of seriously investigating sun protection for the Earth. For example, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change (IPCC) and the National Academy of Sciences in the USA. With this, the subject now becomes socially acceptable, Ken Caldera from the University of Stanford in California says. In conclusion, first, on given occasion in 2019, the Swiss Environment Minister calls for a debate on the spraying of particles into the atmosphere. Second, indications concerning illegal practices of weather manipulation, for example, by spraying particles or by interventions in the ionosphere through extremely strong radio waves, were already being talked about in the official media by weather experts and specialized journalists more than 10 years ago. Third, Josefina Freile highlighted military interests behind the use of so-called climate weapons, which were banned in 1977 for given reasons. She sees the attempt to make the forbidden climate weapons acceptable when relabeled as climate protection program. In light of this background of strong military power interests, it is understandable that the official media are now unanimously fueling fears of CO2 and no longer say a word about completely different causes for droughts, floods, and weather catastrophes of all kinds. Could it be that the panic mongering about CO2 rather is a gigantic distraction and misleading of the population? On top of this, the peoples are being ripped off by threadbare means, controlled and weakened by substances that are harmful to health. Effective environmental protection starts with the disclosure of serious causes for environmental destruction and with raising the sensitivity of the population for these facts. ClarTV is following this for you. We are happy to receive any eyewitness statements.